good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you're listening in. This is your sales enabler, Sundar Nathan. The topic of conversation today is getting to yes, negotiating without giving in. This presentation is adapted from the book Getting to Yes by Roger Fisher and William Ury of the Harvard Negotiation Project. President John F. Kennedy said, "Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate." Any method of negotiation should be fairly judged by three criteria. It should produce a wise agreement, if agreement is possible. It should be efficient. It should improve or at least not damage the relationship. And these three goals are the bare minimum for any decent method of negotiation. What is positional bargaining? You should stay away from this method of negotiating, where your ego really becomes identified with your position. You now have interest in saving face. As more attention is paid to the position that you're in and the other side is in, less attention is devoted to meeting the underlying concerns of the two parties. What happens here? There's dragging feet, stonewalling, threatening to walk out, and other such tactics. All of these increase the time, the costs, and the risk of no agreement at all. Bitter feelings generated by one such encounter may last a lifetime. But choosing a soft and friendly position makes you vulnerable to someone who plays a hard position. Hard always dominates soft in positional bargaining. In principal negotiation, good negotiation occurs on two levels, substance and procedure. When we negotiate on the merits, the first thing is you need to separate the people from the problem. The second aspect, focus on interests, not positions. Third component, generate a variety of possibilities before deciding what to do. And fourthly, insist that the results should be based on some objective standard. So participants should really see themselves working side by side attacking the problem, not each other. What are the stages of a principal negotiation? In a principal negotiation, you invent options for mutual gain. There are three stages. Analysis, where you try to diagnose the situation. Planning, where you plan and come up with additional options and additional criteria. Discussion, the actual communication and negotiation back and forth looking toward agreement. The main point is, in principal negotiations, both parties try to invent options for mutual gain. Now let's talk about people. The ongoing relationship is far more important than the outcome of any negotiation, according to the principles of principal negotiation. If there are psychological problems, use psychological tactics. If perceptions are inaccurate, look for ways to educate. If emotions run high, then find ways to let all involved let off some steam. If misunderstanding exists, work to improve communication. The last thing you want to do is burn a bridge. Make maintaining a working relationship a true priority. What about more specific problems? There are three basic people problems that I'm going to take you through: perception, emotion, and communication. Firstly, perception. You must put yourself in the other person's shoes to understand the problem from their way of thinking. Feel the emotional force with which they believe in it. Understanding is not the same as agreeing. One can understand perfectly and completely disagree. Don't try to deduce their intentions from your fears. Don't blame them for your problem. Try to separate the symptoms from the person that you're talking to. Discuss each other's perceptions. Often, negotiating parties will dismiss concerns on the other side, perceived as not standing in the way of the negotiation, but don't do that. Look for opportunities to act inconsistently with their perceptions. Give them a stake in the outcome by making sure that they participate in the process. In a sense, the process itself is the product. And finally, face saving. Make your proposals consistent with their values. So don't assume, discuss each other's perceptions openly and try to work through differing perceptions together. Secondly, emotions. First, recognize and understand emotions, both theirs and yours. Make emotions explicit and acknowledge them as legitimate. Allow the other side to let off steam. Don't react to emotional outbursts. Adopt the rule that only one person can get angry at a time. Use symbolic gestures. Everyone has emotions, and most negotiators are not any different. Just be honest about emotions. Finally, communication. Whatever you say, you can expect that the other side will almost always hear something different. Sometimes parties give up and talk merely to impress third parties in their own constituency. Don't busy yourself with thinking about the next thing to say. If you are not hearing what the other side is saying, then there is no communication. Try to listen actively and acknowledge what is being said. Speak to be understood. Put yourself in the role of being a co-judge working with the other party towards a common verdict. Speak about yourself, not about them. Describe a problem in terms of its impact on you. So, for example, you can say, I feel let down instead of, you broke your word. Speak for a purpose and know the purpose of your outcome. Try to address communication misunderstandings openly and exemplify your commitment to cooperation. Let's talk about interests in principal negotiation. You can ask for another person's position, making clear that you do not want justification, just a better understanding of their needs, hopes, fears, or desires that they serve. The most powerful interests are basic human needs: security, economic well-being, sense of belonging, recognition, control over one's life, etc. If you want the other side to take your interests into account, explain to them what those interests are. Make your interests come alive. Be specific. Acknowledge their interests as part of the problem. Be sure to show that you appreciate their interests if you want treatment in kind. Put the problem before your answer. Give your interests and reasoning first, and your conclusions or proposals later. Look forward, not back. Instead of asking someone to justify what they did yesterday, ask, who should do what tomorrow? Be concrete but flexible. Treat the opinion that you come up with as simply an illustration. The final decision is going to be worked on later. Be hard on the problem, soft on the person. Show that you are attacking the problem, not the person. Give positive support to the human being on the other side, equal in strength to the vigor with which you emphasize the problem. This really causes cognitive dissonance, and in order for the other side to overcome it, they will be tempted to disassociate from the problem in order to join you to do something about it. Essentially, you need to show that you are putting interests, your interests, the other party's interests, over any position that they have adopted or you have adopted. Let's look at options. For example, what is premature judgment? Nothing is so harmful to inventing as waiting to pounce on the drawbacks of any new idea. Judgment hinders imagination. What is premature closure? If you look for the single best answer from the outset, you are likely to miss a wiser decision-making process where you select from a large number of answers. Don't assume that the bargaining is based on a fixed pie. Sometimes you have to get out of the pie and not just aim to fill in the 100%. Try to increase the size of the pie. Don't concern yourself with only your own immediate needs and interests. Both sides must be considered. Try to separate inventing or coming up with options from deciding. So invent first, decide later. Look for options that will leave the other side satisfied as well. Every negotiation has shared interests. Shared interests are opportunities, not godsends. Try to make them concrete and future-oriented. Stressing your shared interests can make things more smooth and amiable. When you're looking for options or inventing options, look for items that are low cost to you but high value for them, and vice versa. If you place yourself firmly in the shoes of your opposite number, you will understand his or her problem and what kind of options might solve it. If you want a horse to jump a fence, don't raise the fence. It's usually easier to refrain from doing something not being done already than to stop an action that's already going on. Making threats is not enough. Offers are usually more effective. And when planning, write out 1 to 2 sentences on what the most powerful critic of the other side might say about your proposal to prepare. Let's talk about criteria in principled negotiations. You need to negotiate on the basis of objective criteria and not the will of the other side. Commit yourself to getting to a solution that's based on principle, not on pressure. Concentrate on the merits of the problem itself, not the mettle of the parties. In other words, their ability or their will to go head to head with you. Be open to reason, but be closed to threats. Don't forget the cake division tactic. Ask 2 children to divide a cake among themselves. One child cuts, the other picks the first slice. So if the other side would not budge or advance a persuasive reason or basis for their position, then be willing to walk away. Let's talk about objective criteria. What is that? What you need to do is frame every issue as a joint search for specific objective criteria. Reason and be open to reason to which standards are most appropriate and how they should be applied. Never yield to pressure, only to principle. Never be afraid to ask, what's your theory, or how did you arrive at that figure? When negotiating and trust is brought up, simply state, trust is an entirely separate matter. The issue at hand is. If the other side truly will not budge and will not advance a persuasive basis for their position, then there is no further negotiation. What if they're more powerful? The reason you negotiate is to produce something better than the results that you can obtain without negotiating. So for this reason, you should develop a BATNA, or best alternative to negotiated agreement. Keep it close. Committing to interests over positions. You can ask for another person's position, making clear you don't want any justification, just a better understanding of their needs, hopes, fears, or desires. Your BATNA is what you will fall back on in case of a non-agreement. Well, how can you form a good BATNA? 3 steps. Invent a list of actions you can take if no agreement is reached. Try to improve some of the more promising ideas and convert them into practical alternatives. And then tentatively select the alternative that seems the best. The better your BATNA, the relative negotiating power of each side depends mainly on how attractive to each is not reaching an agreement. So, in other words, consider the other side's BATNA. If theirs is so good they don't see any need to negotiate on the merits, consider what you can do to change it. Don't forget to set a tripwire to provide some margin in reserve, that early warning detector that lets you know that they're headed away from negotiating and towards your BATNA. What if they won't play? Do not push back. When they assert their position, do not reject them. When they attack your ideas, do not defend them. When they attack you, don't counterattack. Sidestep their attack and deflect it against the problem. Do not attack their position, look behind it. Treat it as one possible option. Look for the interests behind it. Seek out the principles which it reflects and think about ways to improve it. Don't defend your ideas. Invite criticism and advice and ask them what's wrong with your position. Try to examine the negative judgments to find out their underlying interests and improve your ideas from their point of view. Try to ask them for what they would do if they were in your position. Recast an attack on you as an attack on the problem. Don't defend yourself. Let them blow off some steam. Listen to them, show you understand what they're saying, and when they're done, recast the attack on you towards the problem. Ask questions and pause, and use questions instead of statements. Statements generate resistance, and questions generate answers. Just wait. If you feel they have provided an insufficient answer to an honest question, they will feel uncomfortable and offer more information. Try to figure out why someone wants something and negotiate on those merits. Well, say, your wife or husband wants a bay window. Try to figure out why and see if alternatives exist. For example, more light. Maybe it's a skylight, or maybe it's brighter lamps in the house. Try these statements to help the cause. For example, please correct me if I'm wrong. Could I ask you a few questions to see whether my facts are right? One fair solution might be, and then say if we agree and if we disagree, let me show you where I have trouble following some of your reasoning. It's been a pleasure dealing with you. Let me see if I understand what you're saying. All of these could be used to get them to play and come out and work with you. What if they play dirty? If they use dirty tricks, counter them by using principled negotiation and talk them through the process. The more common types of unfair negotiation strategies are, firstly, deliberate deception, secondly, psychological warfare, thirdly, positional pressure tactics. What is deliberate deception? Deliberate deception is a scenario where they give you phony facts, but you need to get in the habit of trusting but verifying the factual assertions of the other side. Second one is ambiguous authority. Find out about the authority of the other side. It's okay to ask, how much authority do you have in this particular negotiation? Dubious intentions. Get them to commit to their intentions. So less than full disclosure is not the same as deception. So if somebody's asked, what would you be willing to pay? Then they could answer, well, let's not put ourselves under such strong temptation to mislead, right? So they might just give you a partial answer, but it's not the same thing as deceiving you. What are positional pressure tactics? Refusal to negotiate, right? Extreme demands, escalating demands, lock-in tactics, calculated delay, take it or leave it. So in all of these different scenarios, here are some ideas and approaches that you can actually use to handle these. Pause the recording now, take a look at these, and write down the top two that come to your attention in terms of scenarios you've seen before, and try to write those two scenarios down. Maybe somebody told you take it or leave it, or somebody came to you and said, well, thank you for offering me this, I'm going to ask for more, and then the next time you go back to them say, well, I want more for the same price, etc. Pause the recording and write down two scenarios where you've seen these positional pressure tactics before. All right, welcome back. Come on, did you actually pause the recording? If you didn't, I think it would be fun to do it. Just write down two scenarios where you came across these. If you did, let's move forward. What is psychological warfare? Sometimes people will create stressful situations for you. They might attack you personally. They may comment on your clothes, being late, interrupting to deal with others. You need to address them explicitly. They might do the good guy, bad guy on you. Good cop, bad cop. They may threaten you. So here are some scenarios that you might come across and some approaches for addressing those scenarios. Finally, in conclusion, negotiating is getting what you deserve and being decent. Never give in for the purpose of trying to improve a relationship. Don't measure success by how far the other party has moved. And in most instances, it's just as inappropriate to ask a negotiator who's winning as to ask who's winning in a marriage. Remember JFK's quote, "Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate." Thank you for listening. This has been a Salescast on negotiating and principled negotiation by Sundar Nathan. Happy selling.